opportunity to welcome our three witnesses today. Thank you very much for taking your valuable time and spending some of that with us here today, and of course those in the audience that are interested. This is our first in a series of hearings this panel will hold examining the business challenges in the defense industry today. Chairman McKeon and Ranking Member Smith established this panel to take a deep dive into the challenges facing firms that already work with the Department of Defense and those that want to do business with the Department. I'm honored that Chairman McKeon asked me to lead this panel alongside my good friend from Washington State, Rick Larson, and I might add for one of our witnesses, you may know the town as you drive to your farm in Bedford County, you may pass through Everett. Well, that's the important Everett, Pennsylvania. He's from Everett, Washington, so I'm going to keep making references at every chance I can get so that I can elevate Everett, Pennsylvania to a rank above the great city of Everett, Washington. But I'm glad that Mr. Larson's leading this panel with me. And rounding out our panelship members are Bobby Schilling from Illinois, who I don't believe is going to be making it in today. Bobby represents the 17th District in Illinois, which contains Rock Island Arsenal. Bobby's a small business owner and has firsthand experience with the difficulties dealing with the government at all levels. Betty Sutton, who represents the 13th District of Ohio, as the co-chair of the Congressional Task Force on Job Creation. Betty's dedicated to promoting good business practices and creating American jobs. John Runyon from New Jersey. John represents the 3rd District of New Jersey, which contains Fort Dix and McGuire Air Force Base and has a vested interest in defense business practices across the board. Colleen Busa. I'm going to get, before it's all over, I'll get it down to perfection. She's from the 1st District of Hawaii and has been involved in Hawaii politics since 1998. With a large defense presence in Hawaii, Colleen understands how important it is to bring efficiency and effectiveness to the defense industry. And Alan West from the 22nd District of Florida. Alan retired from the Army in 2004 after 22 years and brings a unique perspective of experience on both sides of the table, government and industry. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here today and taking the time to lend your expertise to this effort. We've all heard in our districts and across the country from businesses that find it extremely difficult to successfully navigate the DoD acquisition system. This is particularly true for small businesses and those involved in the science and technology efforts. While there are programs out there that assist businesses in transitioning innovative ideas and technologies to a final end product that satisfies a military requirement, there are many obstacles in the way. In these current economic times, we must make good use of every tax dollar we spend on defense, and we can do this by leveraging the heart of the American workforce, small businesses. By rendering barriers to entry, we can generate competition, spur innovation, stimulate the economy. So I look forward to working with my fellow panel members here as we move forward. And with that, I'll yield to the ranking member, Mr. Larson, if he has any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Chairman McKeon and Ranking Member Smith as well for putting this panel together. In 6 months, we will have substantive solutions to the challenges that small and medium-sized businesses face when they approach the Department of Defense. The federal budget is increasingly strained, and we have to ensure that the needs of our military to provide for national security and defense are not shortchanged. In order to accomplish this, DoD will need to stretch their dollar and maintain robust competition. Better contracting also offers a chance for job creation and growth for companies that often have the best products, but find the barriers in their path when they approach the DoD. Now, how to make and implement improvements is something we will aim to discover over the next few months. Small and medium-sized businesses need to be part of the defense industrial base, and that means rethinking the current model. Our goal must be to break down barriers and improve competition for defense contracting to get better prices, better products, and better services for the warfighter. So I want to thank our witnesses for participating today to help us understand their issues as well as a general framework for the challenges that we're going to face as we help identify solutions. Last month, Bill joined me in Everett, Washington, which we've heard so much about already, but I'll tell you the truth about it, which is in my district, where we held a roundtable with about 20 local businesses. We spoke with them about their successes and their failures in working with the DoD. One individual spoke of having to outline technical specifics to the DoD in order to have a proposal released, only then to have the competition have access to those specifics. Another spoke of the very simple issue of not receiving payment on time, a serious concern for small companies who are not flush with cash. We need to continue to talk and to listen to these businesses and to find solutions for them. So I want to thank all my colleagues for agreeing to serve on this panel. I believe this entire group of members brings a diverse perspective on these issues. We're all here because we want to improve the chance for competition, for job growth, and for making certain our military and our women and men in the military have the best options and capabilities available to them. Thanks again.
Thank you. Before I turn to our witnesses, we have a piece of administrative work that we have to take care of. So I ask unanimous consent that the work plan for the panel, which has been distributed to all members, be entered into the record, and without objection, so ordered. Again, that'll be official part of the record, and we're going to get started here. And again, I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I'll introduce all of you now and then go to each of you for your testimony. First, Mr. A.R. Trey Hodgkins III, Senior Vice President for National Security and Procurement Policy, Tech America. Glad to have you here, and glad to know you have some sort of roots planning in Pennsylvania. Mr. Bradford L. Smith, Jr., President and CEO of Strategic Analysis Incorporated. And again, Mr. Smith informs me that his family's from Butler County, Pennsylvania. So now if I can just get some kind of Pennsylvania, I can go back to my district and say everybody testified in front of me today were Pennsylvanians or had some connection. But Ms. Heidi Jacobus is the CEO of Cybernet Systems Corporation. Thank you for being here. And again, welcome you all. And we'll turn to Mr. Hodgkins first, and you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Larson, the members of the panel. My name is Trey Hodgkins, and I am the Senior Vice President for National Security and Procurement Policy at Tech America. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify about business challenges within the defense industry and highlight tech sector perspectives on those challenges. Technology is ubiquitous in the missions of the Department, and we believe it is a significant differentiator in the success of those missions. Tech America is a leading voice for the U.S. technology industry, representing approximately 1,000 companies of all sizes from the public and commercial sectors of the economy. Our members range from traditional defense industrial base integrators or DIB companies to the most innovative and agile of small technology firms. They function as prime suppliers, subcontractors, and many are commercial in nature and choose to operate entirely outside of the federal market. Most have a commercial business model, meaning they offer commercial items for sale around the world that are developed and manufactured using a global supply chain. These conditions impact how they view government actions and whether or not they are interpreted as barriers, impediments, or incentives. When commercial companies choose to sell to the Department, they rely upon 90s-era reforms that created a preference for commercial items in federal government acquisitions. The same laws require those transactions be as close as possible to commercial transactions for the same items and not include government-unique requirements. These reforms gave DoD access to commercial technology and innovation while driving savings for the taxpayer. Unfortunately, many of those premises have been forgotten or abandoned, and doing business with DoD no longer bears any meaningful resemblance to commercial business for the same or similar items. The federal government and DoD market share is also shrinking, and for many technology companies, it now represents 5% or less of their total global market. Making the business case for accepting the conditions we will discuss today is increasingly difficult in a global company or our small business. This impacts DoD access to innovation, competition, and mission success. For some commercial companies, business with the federal government has become too burdensome or too risky, and they choose to stay out. I'd like to elaborate on some of those barriers, and we'll start with regulations and their burdens as an example. A barrier to entry for innovation, technology, and small businesses is the regulatory burden on companies that sell to DoD. For example, Tech America identified an apparent increase in the use of interim acquisition rules with immediate enforcement requirements. The chart I included in my written statement shows that there's a clear and pronounced upward trend from 8 cases in 2008 to 38 cases last year. This means companies and agencies have less time to react to proposals and respond to become compliant. It also means that public participation is minimized in the process. Another trend is the increase in acquisition regulation reporting burdens. Waivers from the Paperwork Reduction Act have become commonplace and fail to acknowledge the significant cumulative and government-unique burden these requirements place on businesses. In calculating the reporting burden, the methodology the government uses only accounts for time to complete the form, not the time needed to collect the data, and we believe it is a gross underestimation of the burden on industry. DoD-specific regulatory trends are no better, with a marked increase in the use of guidance as a replacement for what industry feels should be promulgated regulatory actions. Compliance burdens associated with guidance or regulations are barriers to successful entry and sustainment in the DIB. Other barriers are just as daunting and discouraging. Commercial companies look at the levels of disclosure and conclude with relative ease that they are a sufficient deterrent to doing business with the Federal Government. This apprehension is growing as requirements for reporting and disclosure are expanded to subcontractors and suppliers. Another barrier is the 3% withholding tax on government contractors. Tech America commends the Armed Services Committee for their leadership in the effort to repeal this provision and encourage your continued efforts. The reduction in cash flow as a result of this withholding often forecloses considerations small businesses might have for bringing their innovations to government. Long procurement lead times typically encountered at DoD are also a barrier, particularly for commercial companies. They are unaccustomed to such long lead times and usually operate in environments using agile development in incremental models for short cycles of 6 months to a year. The DoD's 24 or more month lead times are not conducive to attracting the innovation these companies could bring to bear. I'd like to turn to challenges to bringing innovation to the public sector and DoD and point to government-unique requirements placed on companies. I've already touched on some of those above. Others include the recent increases in efforts to change the ownership of intellectual property when companies sell to the government. Governing laws and case decisions define specific points when ownership changes, but new proposals would blur those lines and make the government a part owner for even relatively minor investments into an innovation for adoption by the government. Another impediment to effective adoption of technology and innovation is the emphasis placed in acquisitions on lowest priced, technically acceptable. The practice has become the preference and now forces behavior that overlooks better or more secure products to save on the price. There now exists an aversion to consider for award products or services that are not lowest priced, technically acceptable, even if the offering is more innovative and is the real best value for the taxpayer. An example where this policy is causing harmful consequences is in the assurance of the supply chain for the Department. Tech America supports a change to require that acquisitions of information technology hardware, software, and services are limited to the original equipment manufacturers or their authorized suppliers. But lowest price technically acceptable does not support such a need. I'll close by touching on financial impediments to the innovation adoption. Tech America believes the panel should focus on how funding limitations frequently pose a far bigger problem for transitioning technology for DoD. Current processes require the identification of technology desired before starting the multi-year funding request process. Frequently, the product is several generations old before that process can be completed. As was recommended in our GTO 21 report to OMB, Congress should examine the way it funds technology acquisition and deployment because it is a real barrier to the successful adoption of innovation in the Department. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to raise these issues for consideration with you this afternoon and look forward to further engagement with you on these issues.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Smith, please proceed.
I also want to thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Bradford Smith. Yes. There we go. I'll just, whatever it's going to be. My company, Strategic Analysis Incorporated, is a small to mid-sized company. We've been providing professional services to federal agencies. We're service-disabled, veteran-owned, founded in 1986, and have approximately 250 employees. We have offices in Arlington, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Colorado Springs, and Dayton, Ohio. And the types of services we provide are systems engineering, advisory services, intelligence support services, information technology, and conference planning. So it's a variety of services for the Departments of Defense, Energy, and Homeland Security. For most procurements, our 250-employee company is considered a large business, so we must compete for full and open. For some, we're a small business. For SBIR, for research work we do, it's small. I'm making these comments after working in services for these agencies and departments for about 38 years. And again, I understand that the format is to provide some brief comments ahead of fielding questions. So I would like to raise a few issues that I outline in my paper. One specific concern of mine comes from the current trend to using ultra-large indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts for set-asides for very small businesses. The tendency to bundle is both prevalent in full and open competitions as well as in small business set-aside. And likely with the highly constrained environment, there'll be an increasing tendency to bundle. There's efficiencies from the government side. I'm very concerned that the very small companies that win such ultra-large set-asides must focus resources on strong proposal and program management capabilities. We've seen it across the spectrum of competitions we've been involved with, rather than on the unique skills and capabilities that they bring to bear. From my point of view, this is a tremendous deterrent to innovation in the sector of our industrial base where much of our innovation starts. Secondly, as a mid-sized business owner, I'm quite concerned about being excluded from many set-asides or any set-aside competitions as a prime contractor. As a mid-sized company, for almost all of the procurements that we go after, we compete full and open. I find it hard to believe that a company with 250 employees is too big to compete for a $1 billion 5-year service contract. And that's the case today, with the exception of the Air Force. The Air Force has set aside, has created NAICS codes where larger small businesses, 500, 1,000, 1,200, can compete for service contracts. For us, growth to mid-size has been over a long period of time. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary. We've done it through vertical and horizontal movement to various client areas. Our reputation precedes us into the marketplace. We've not really been focused on set-asides, but we now find ourselves to be in a position where, because of set-asides, we no longer are in we find it more difficult to compete for the same work we've been doing for over the period of our life. And again, I have to say, many owners of companies in my position now are choosing or have chosen to sell their companies to larger firms. But I truly believe that the government is losing or could lose a significant sector in mid-sized businesses. And I'm a strong advocate of mid-sized businesses, because they have all the charm of small businesses and they don't have any of the trappings and downside of larger businesses. And I commend to you a study done by David Bertaw and his team on the services industrial sector. I'll leave a copy of this, where it shows the trend of the sector in the middle, not the small, not the large, but the medium-sized companies as being the one that has shrunk over the last 10 to 20 years. Again, I can't reemphasize my belief that mid-sized companies are a significant resource for the Department of Defense. And again, the differentiation of size is a continuum, small, medium, large. Mid-sized companies are as innovative as small, I would argue. They're agile, and they have significant potential to create jobs. The conventional wisdom is that small businesses do that. I would argue that mid-sized businesses do it better and can be a more effective generator of jobs. I want to highlight one specific regulation that makes the problem worse for small business. I'll call it the 51% rule. Small businesses that win large prime contracts or any set-aside contract are required to themselves execute 51% of the effort, even while they may be teamed with other small businesses. And I do believe mid-sized companies or other small businesses are much more effective at teaming with small business than larger firms. To get the work done, to get the small business contribution counted on their team, small businesses are forced now to form joint ventures, which I view as a highly risky endeavor for small business. So you now are seeing a greater prevalence of joint ventures of small businesses going after $500 million service contracts as a team. So you create a new corporate entity. The 51% rule is very inflexibly applied at this point. The Air Force, up until the GAO decision several years ago, was allowing the contribution of all the small businesses to be counted. And in recent times, based on that case, everybody is strident about it. Companies are disallowed unless the contribution they're going to actually not only bid but perform. And if you have I'm going to notionally say a $500 million contract, that's $100 million a year for a small business. And I mean small, meaning $4 million revenue companies. It's a huge extrapolation to perform that much work. So I recommend that, in fact, what's interesting about that is that it's frequent that such companies outgrow the ability to compete for follow-on work. So if you have a small business effectively performing a certain piece of work, growing to the size to provide the types of service needed, at the end of that 5-year or 10-year potentially contract, they're no longer a small business and can't compete. Although consideration of the definition of inherently governmental is not specifically on your agenda, I recommend you look at it. OMB recently issued a policy letter to attempt to clarify the definition of inherently governmental. I would suggest that the current FAR definition, regulations, and policies that were in place prior to that are quite effective. The new policy defines not only inherently governmental, but functions that are closely associated with inherently governmental and functions that are critical. Not that one can't define those, but what the net effect is that they are, the net effect I believe will be unnecessary insourcing and for the government and for the public, not necessarily the best value solution that comes from competition. My submission has a little bit more on each of these. I'd like to make just a few specific suggestions. The mid-sized business squeeze, as I'm calling it, I suggest the panel explore ways of supporting mid-sized businesses through, for example, creating a new set-aside program, modifying the NAICS codes, the definitions, the fairly Byzantine NAICS codes set that are in place today, or modifying the small business size standard to encompass mid-sized businesses. I'd suggest the business that we are in, which is supporting government agencies in a relatively close way. Many of our employees work on government facilities, is a good place to target for mid-sized businesses. Often the agencies are needing more capacity, a broader set of technical skills, and strong program management capability, which one doesn't typically find in a small business. You find that typically in a large business, but you can also find it in a small. And where you have strict constraints on organizational conflicts of interest, mid-sized companies can be quite effective at mitigating any concerns about organizational conflicts of interest. On the subject of very large multi-award, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantities contracts that are set aside for small, I recommend that is a poor choice for small businesses and that the panel look for other types of contracts that more effectively capture the strength of small business, their innovation, their specific unique charm, the people. And then lastly, I recommend you look at the new policy letter on inherently governmental, and that I think the best solution would be for something akin to the A76 process, where the government can truly determine what's the best value. As soon as we start defining inherently governmental, close to inherently, slightly close to inherently governmental, we're into increasing the size of the government staff, and not that you shouldn't. If it's the public trust that needs to be protected, it is inherently governmental. It should be done by a government employee. Anything else should be up for grabs as to whichever is the best value to the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And Mr. Jacobus?
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Larson, other members of the panel, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I've submitted my written statement for the record. May I have permission?
Yes.
Okay.
It's going to be in the record, your full statement, but ask you to summarize it, keep it within 5 minutes or so. Thank you.
I'm Heidi Jacobus. I'm the founder, CEO, and majority stockholder of Cybernet Systems, a small business in Ann Arbor, Michigan. 20 years ago, I started Cybernet on the basis of a single Department of Defense SBIR contract. That's the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And during the question period, please ask me any questions about the structure of SBIR, because I have 20 years of experience and know a lot about it. I'm an unlikely entrepreneur. I'm an unlikely Department of Defense contractor. I was born to parents who didn't have any high school education. My mother was an immigrant from Germany and couldn't speak English when I was born. My father was a first-generation American, dropped out of high school, joined the CCCs, then the Army, worked in factories. They valued education, and I complied. I was very fortunate to have obtained a very good education by scholarships, work-study programs, and my parents' sacrifices, of course. I went to graduate school at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, where I studied computer science. I got my master's degree and worked for 3 more years towards my PhD. Then I got married, moved to Texas, worked at Texas Instruments and in the research lab, and had children, dropped out of my research for a while, and a few years later picked up my research again. When I was at the university engineering library, I opened up a book, and the book was an RFP from the Department of Defense, and there was my research topic in the SBIR book. DARPA was asking for a proposal on something I'd been working on for the last 9 months. So I was pretty excited because I had a 40-page working paper on the topic. I shaved it down to 25 pages, submitted it as an SBIR, and a few months later I got a phone call from a DARPA colonel who said it was the best proposal he'd ever read. So I was up and running. I went in, I quit the university, I hung up a shingle, I moved my daughter into her brother's bedroom, and the first Cybernet was there. Now, we had to deal with regulations, and having a German mother, I had to deal with the rules of the contracts, and so when I got a contract that said FAR clause so-and-so, jewel ball bearing, I had to drive to a federal library to find out what that meant, because I wasn't going to sign the contract asserting something about jewel ball bearings that I couldn't feasibly understand without the reference. I didn't know what the word overhead meant. I was a technology person. I was an engineer, 9 years of college, 5 years in computer science. I didn't know about business or business structure. So I figured it out, and SBIR is a beautiful program where small businesses can slowly take their technology and create a business structure. The guidelines are very clear. The initial contracts, the phase ones, are very small, and the forms are easy to fill out. So for overhead, we measured the square footage of my daughter's bedroom, multiplied it, divided it by our house square footage, and there was my overhead rate. So I learned by doing, and now 20 years later, I have 60 employees. We have 35 patents issued. We have SBIR equipment that comes actually from a Picatinny Arsenal, SBIR, and is now in Kuwait. It's been there 6 years, and it's still very productive, saves the Army hundreds of millions of dollars. A 4-star general who has visited the project many times, he's now retired, said at an AUSA conference that our machine saved the Army $27 million in its first 4 months of operation. 6 years later, you can multiply. That's an extremely good investment for the Army to have made in that Picatinny Arsenal SBIR that over some years turned into this wonderful piece of equipment in the field called ATAX, which is an ammunition sorter. I'm nearly out of time, so I'd like to stop.
Sure, we'll give you, you'll have plenty of time to ask some questions.
So thank you.
Very interesting founding of your business. One question I have, though.
Sure.
Isn't Cybernet, isn't it the company on Terminator?
No.
Just want to clarify it.
I was actually on Squawk Box last year in August, before Mark Haynes passed away, unfortunately. And Mark Haynes asked me the same question. and I said, Mr. Haynes, we're ahead of Terminator. Cybernet was formed a year before the Terminator movie came out. And actually, at the time, Cybernet had a Humvee borrowed from the Marine Corps Arsenal in Detroit that we were retrofitting with robotic controls.
Really?
So I think we were a little bit ahead of the curve.
I hope you got some money, since they stole the name of your company and put it in the movie. But anyways, thank you again for your testimony. We're going to go through questions. I'm going to start with a couple of questions. First, Mr. Hodgkins, you talked about. Where do I have it? You talked about the burdens and you said risk. I don't know if you really touched on the risk part of why is it risky. Can you go through some of the things you see out there that are risky dealing with the Department of Defense, specifics of why you consider it risk? Because a lot of people would consider doing business with the federal government not very risky, very burdensome, but...
Sure. The risks I touched on a few that the businesses do see as risks. For example, the potential loss or partial loss of intellectual property because they do business with the government. Many companies will walk away from the business on that basis alone. And the changes that are being proposed simply blur the lines. If you have a small business, as Mr. Jacobus described, some of those things can be impenetrable or very difficult to determine, and the idea that you would potentially forfeit your intellectual property by doing business with the government makes many companies see that as an insurmountable risk. Another example would be in the disclosures that I talked about. Many of the things that the government asks companies to disclose either as part of the ordinary acquisition regulation reporting burden, or as some of the contractor databases that we've built, things like that. Some companies see that data as proprietary or certainly bordering on it, and the disclosure of what they deem to be the secret sauce of the success of their company on a public website or in some form of a database that their competitors may see it, they see that as a risk that's just too big to overcome, and so they choose not to face those challenges and face the commercial market instead.
Intellectual property rights, is that something you're talking about?
Yes.
Yes. You don't want to give away, again...
Correct. I mean, they wouldn't want to, you wouldn't want to develop a great software program, but when the government wants to buy it, they want me to modify it using their money to include some encryption capability, for example.
Right.
It's our interpretation of the proposals that are on the table that the government would own part or more, significant part of that software and the intellectual property involved in it. And companies look at those reasonable conclusions and say, it's just too risky. I don't want to give up my intellectual property and the products that I've developed.
Right. And your association, you represent small companies, medium-sized and large?
Absolutely.
And do you find some of these things are across the board they affect, but focus on the small and medium size, you find it a much greater problem for the members that are smaller members like Mr. Smith or Mr. Jacobus?
Absolutely. The small or mid-sized companies usually, they have a collection of patents, as was noted. That if to lose their rights in those patents would mean the company is gone. The larger companies face similar challenges and certainly don't want to lose the intellectual property they've developed, but their business with the government is more diverse. It covers more of the sectors of the defense market and the industrial base, and so they're better able to deal with those challenges. They also have more sophisticated administrative capabilities and legal staffs that can address and interpret those things for them.
Thank you. And Mr. Jacobus, you said you had a lot of experience with the SBIR program. Yes. Can you tell us some of the hurdles you face and some of the things you see that, as a small business owner, that we could look at improving the program to make it easier for smaller companies to.
Right. Well, spinning off of Mr. Hodgkin's statement about the, excuse me, which
Intellectual property?
the intellectual property.
Right.
SBIR is an extremely good balance to the intellectual property program. Under SBIR, we have data rights, and it's balanced by the fact that we, as technology companies doing very special things for the Defense Department, we're overkill for the commercial market. So the machines we build would not be attractive to some factory automation, because factory automation is really easy compared to what we do in the field in Kuwait. So we have to have a good relationship with our government customer. And I think under SBIR, the intellectual property system has worked very well for 30 years now, and I hope it continues. But one of the biggest challenges for SBIR companies is that the technology we develop is new technology. And so in the military, there's a metric called Technology Readiness Level, TRL. And it's defined what a technology readiness level is. Something's on a piece of paper, it's 1. And if something is, shrink wrapped off the shelf tested, it's 10. So you see. The SBIR phase 1s and phase 2s, because what we're doing is new, the only reason we got an SBIR is that product or system could not have been purchased commercially. Everything innovative is new, and that's why SBIR companies get so many patents. We are automatically doing something new. SBIR funding takes us to phase 4, TRL level 4. So we're not over the hump yet. And what is needed for 5, 6, and 7 is testing and evaluation. And in the case of a Navy product we've developed, we had to take the product out to sea trial, which involved sending 2 engineers on a ship with Marines and using it out at sea. It's expensive. We had to drop it in salt water, shake it, and you can imagine the rigor that has to be gone through for a military product compared to something that's a disposable something at a big box store. So the conundrum for small businesses is that there is literally no funding source any place for the test and evaluation. Now, there's something new on the horizon, the RIF program, the Rapid Innovation Fund, and that has promised that it can serve as a competitive way to try to get some test and evaluation money so that you can bridge TRL levels 5, 6, 7, and then get to the end where you can literally field it and sell it to the military. That's a good goal. But the RIF program is very small. It's not yet activated. It's only partially announced. And it's really uncertain how many projects it'll be able to fund.
Right. And I'm not even familiar with the RIF program, but we'll get into that. I'm going to get on my time has expired.
Okay.
We're going to stay on the 5-minute clock, but we can do a couple of rounds of questions because I think we have plenty of time. So with that, I'll yield to Mr. Larson for a question.
Thanks. Mr. Hodgkins, with regards to your testimony on page 6, I think it is, it said Tech America members are on record supporting a change in policy to require that sourcing for acquisitions of information tech hardware, software, so on, are limited to original manufacturers or suppliers who are authorized by those manufacturers. Could you go into a little more detail on why that is and why that would be helpful?
Well, we believe it's a policy challenge the government faces, where and potentially conflicts with small business incentive programs that you have, particularly when you look at things like the GSA schedules and acquiring products those people may be reselling. The problem the government is faced with, and certainly as members of this committee, you've probably had briefings that I don't have access to regarding the challenges with counterfeits and other malicious products that are successfully or unsuccessfully inserted in the DoD supply chain. There are a number of legislative and regulatory initiatives that are attempting to address that, and this committee has generated a couple of those. The problem we see is that the government, and when you couple it with the lowest price technically acceptable preference I discussed, the acquisition community's behavior is to go out and find what can I get with the lowest price versus what can I get that I know actually came from that vendor. And I have some degree of assurance that there's not a counterfeit chip in it or some malicious code in the firmware that would give access to someone else. So we have supported the concept that for purposes, certainly for critical systems like we might find at DoD, the government should look at a policy that says we're only going to buy from trusted sources like the original equipment manufacturer, people they've authorized to resell their products, and there are a few other programs where vendors can go through and be certified as a trusted source.
Can you explain in your testimony on page 2, or at least maybe not explain, provide an opinion about why, in Tech America's view, we drifted away from the Clinger-Cohen reforms, focusing on off-the-shelf commercial technologies into what you're describing today?
I think there's a lot of reasons. Some of the issues that I also discussed drive us, reporting requirements, for example. In a commercial transaction, I wouldn't have the kind of reporting requirements I'd have if I wanted to do business with the government. Much of that is understandable. The government has a different set of shareholders, if you will, and so there are different things we have to disclose if we're doing business with the government. But the idea that I'm buying generally commodity items now, even, we have to make disclosures about what is my price, how did I arrive at that price. That's a perfect example. Generally speaking, when I have a commercial item acquisition, if I go out and buy something that's offered out in the market and I buy it for whatever the price is offered for in the market, then it is automatically presumed I got a fair price because the market has set that price. We've seen a drive at DoD and other agencies to, even though it's a commercial item, we want you to now share with me information about how you built that price. What are your personnel rates? What are your compensation package components? What are the other things that you are including in that price, which gets us away from the tenet of the Clinger-Cohen era, was that if I buy a commercial product from the commercial marketplace, I'm assumed to have achieved a fair and reasonable price.
How would you address that, say, in a situation like with Mr. Jacobus, where the technology of the product maybe doesn't have the commercial application as clearly as another product?
Well, I think her example was a good one. I would point to actually the reverse as a good model, and we see this a lot whether we're dealing with innovative research all the way up to the largest integrations of weapons systems, where you have a lot of commercial products are now the preference for many of the functionalities and capabilities in the weapon systems or in the research that we may be deploying. So you look at data capabilities for deployed soldiers. We're looking at commercially available handheld devices and how do we get that data to them on an iPhone or an Android phone. When you look at a weapons platform and aircraft, you're probably assimilating commercially available guidance systems or radar systems, communication systems, even some of the sensor systems are now commercially available. And so you have an amalgamation of those, and it's the practices and policies around the government unique elements of a weapon system that are now bleeding over into incorporating those commercial things. And the benefit those commercial things brings is that the private sector paid for all that innovation and research, and you're getting the benefit of commercially available products at a price that's set by the commercial market, not a price. If you had to build those radar systems or comm systems or guidance systems from scratch based on government specs, it'd be far more costly than the same systems you could get a commercial variant.
Mr. Smith, could you explain a little bit more on page 1 of your testimony, to the last couple lines of the second to last paragraph there? It concerns small companies that win the ultra-large set-asides must focus their resources on strong proposal and program management capabilities rather than their unique skill sets and peoples. Could you explain to me why that's a problem?
We do not. Over the last several years, as we've grown out of the ability to compete for contracts that have been set aside, we've necessarily joined teams of other companies, many of whom are small businesses who are primes. We've seen very innovative companies. Again, we're service providers. We're not creating intellectual property except associated with the delivery of service. We've seen these companies have to hire program managers, people from larger firms, and frequently as contracts are set aside for small, the incumbent larger firms are offering mentorship and assistance and personnel to come in to help them manage what will be large contracts for them. And the larger service contracts do have a fairly large regulatory burden associated with them. You have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the service provided is actually provided and it's of the quality that you are expecting out of your own company. And when you build larger teams, as opposed to nurture a particular small business, the skill set's different. I think it's bad because you're losing the up-close innovation, the agility of smaller firms. You're turning smaller firms who don't have even the strengths of larger firms into management organizations rather than innovative organizations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Runyon.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. It's kind of a general question for all of you if you want to. I think we're kind of touching on it, but as a federal government, do you feel we have a coherent industrial policy to actually look at our national security?
No.
No?
No, and I think there's lots of studies that have been done that say that we don't value our defense industrial base like other countries do. For example, there was a procurement for the newest, greatest ground vehicle called the Ground Combat Vehicle. The solicitation came out 2 years ago. I was at the meeting of AUSA at Fort Lauderdale when it came out, 11 o'clock on a Thursday, and everybody in the room jumped up, went out, got their cell phones, downloaded the proposal. It was so eagerly anticipated. 9 months later, the government pulled the contract, the RFP, just vaporized, it was gone. So for 9 months, the defense industry of this country had been spending enormous amounts of their brain power working on this proposal to design and build the next class of ground vehicles. Well, that wasn't the end of it. We had teamed with a large company on that proposal. So the large company was spending, I guess, tens of millions of dollars. We were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. 2 months later, the next new GCV instantiation comes out, new proposal. And it's not that different than the first one, but it's different enough that we work for another 9 months. Everyone's spending lots of money, lots of time. One prime contractor at a conference in Warren, Michigan, said that 30% of their engineering time had been spent addressing writing to this RFP. Now, we have a limited amount of scientists and engineers in this country. If a massive number are writing to RFPs that get pulled and get turned into nothing, or as GCV worked out, the 3 selections that were on the board turned into 2, there's a lot of work that went into designing and doing something, and that's more and more for the large companies. Before you do something new, you have to build it and show it, and then sell it. It's not really a design contract. So we're losing the competition and innovation for new systems. And I think that's a policy issue.
Thank you. And
I'd say the principal dysfunction is the adversarial relationship that is evolving between companies who do business for the government and the government. I think there's a fiduciary responsibility that the government employees have to live up to, but we seem to be on all of the disclosures associated with doing business with the government for us are associated with the fact that there's a lack of trust. And there's got to be a better environment where some baseline information needs to be disclosed. There's not one. We are service providers for government. We're probably the most highly regulated industry in the country, and there's not one fact about me, my finances, the company's finances. It isn't known, and soon won't be disclosed publicly. And I think that's all based on a lack of trust between the companies and the government.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, I had just talking about growing from small, medium to a large company. Have you or anyone you know ever thought twice about getting into a contract with fear of climbing that ladder too fast?
That thought never crossed my mind. I know there's there are people with whom we do business that are small, a company that's 50 people, about the size of Cybernet. Because of the regulatory environment, there's some 50-person threshold. They won't hire more than 50 people. But I think typically company owners don't think that way. They just grow into whatever they grow into, and then all of a sudden you look back and you can't do what you did before.
Yeah, and it looks like once you take on the big contract, like you said, 5-10 years down the road, I'm not at a place to where I can get into the small business, but I'm not big enough to compete at that higher level.
Right. The mid-sized companies is a very interesting and dicey place to be. We just happen to be there now in a time when the budgets are constrained, and the environment's not exactly conducive to where we are right now. But I'm really positive. I actually believe small and mid-sized companies have a lot to contribute to this nation, and I encourage you to think about not only small but mid-sized companies.
Chairman, my time's expired. I'll yield back.
Thank you. Just to clarify, you're considered a small business not because of the numbers, because 500 is one of the metrics. How much money? What's the dollar figure that puts you over the top?
In many procurements, surprisingly, it's either $4.5 or $7 million.
And then
so we're far over it.
Right, and 250 employees.
By definition, if you have technical people, our staff is technical, our staff is administrative. But by definition, if you have that many people, you are operating revenues, unless you're losing money, that are more than the $7 million. The Service Disabled Veteran-Owned program that the Veterans Department has just begun a certification process for is $7 million. So even though we're Service Disabled Veteran-Owned company, we're not small by the VA's definition.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hanabusa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me begin with Mr. Hodgkins. I'm curious about your description throughout your testimony about your members. And also in your disclosure, you don't seem to have any contracts. So can you tell me who your members are and how you come to be able to testify about the problems we're facing with military contracts?
Sure. My members are manufacturers and then distributors and resellers and integrators of information technology, hardware, software, and then the services necessary to put those things together, build those things, and then operate those things. They also include companies that are working around those others. They range from the largest integrators selling the largest IT systems to the federal government down to 1-, 2-, 3-man shops in Silicon Valley writing software. Very unique, very specific analytics software that might be used in the intelligence community, or they may be selling commercial products like the laptops or software that run those laptops.
So what I'm trying to understand is, as you come here and you testify and you submit testimony to us, I want to know how is it, or what is it that you do for your members that gives you the insight to come here and to tell us about the shortfalls of the system?
Sure. Well, we're a trade association, so we represent the corporations. Those corporations, hundreds of the members of our total member base are government contractors, and we have centers of focus within the trade association that look at the issues they raise with us being of concern, and they range from regulatory, legislative, and administrative initiatives.
So this is really something that you're garnering from what they've told you as their representative, and that's
Yes.
what you're relaying to
And
us.
then my interactions on their behalf in those arenas.
But you personally do not have any experience in terms of actually submitting a proposal like Ms. Jacobus. You don't
No,
have
I work
work
for a
on it.
trade association, and we are not government contractors.
I just wanted to be clear as to
Sure.
what your format was. And Mr. Smith, one of the things that you said that was very interesting is you made a distinction that you are a service provider and you're not like a creator. So I believe Ms. Jacobus is sort of in a different category for the two of you. So when you say you are a service provider, and you were complaining about the 51% rule in particular, what exactly do you mean when you say you are a service provider and not an intellectual property creator?
We do create intellectual property associated with services. And again, I'll take systems engineering as a service. I'm an electronic engineer. I also went to school in Pennsylvania. I'm a Carnegie Tech grad. But we provide advice on an hourly time and materials basis often to agencies that do R&D management. DARPA, the Office of Naval Research, organizations in other departments as well that do research. They seek support in making sure they're up on the right technologies. They seek support in evaluating the progress of an R&D endeavor. They seek support for judging whether a particular R&D provider has satisfactorily met the terms and conditions of a contract from a technical point of view. So we have engineers and scientists in specific disciplines that change over time because the areas of interest of different agencies change over time.
So can you tell me what kind of contract you would be bidding for with the government?
Well, the term of art, the two terms of art that we use are CETA and ANAS. CETA is Systems Engineering and Technical Assistance Contracts. Many acquisition organizations in the services or in OSD or defense agencies have competitions to seek companies to provide systems engineering. So we will help them from a technical point of view, or again, we run meetings. We actually have a very strong capability in conference coordination. So we help bring together and facilitate meetings of technical folks with the end objective of the particular meeting to bring diverse technologies together and come up with a common vision for how to proceed forward or a common approach to a particular problem. So CETA is one nature of a contract we go after. ANAS is the other, advisory and assistance contracts, and these can range from studies, what are the requirements to do, what is the balance of requirements versus technological capabilities in a particular area of emphasis by an agency of the Department of Defense. What are the trends? We often look at worldwide technology trends. What other countries are doing research in a particular area of interest to the Department of Defense, and how does our research stack up against their research? Program managers DARPA is a somewhat unique agency in that they bring in program managers for a relatively short period of time, 4 to 6 years. So we help program managers in the process of learning about acquisitions. We help program managers in the process of creating programs that are good and executing and monitoring programs that are good.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to next turn to Mr. West, but before I do, since I got a core of the committee here, we're looking at having a field hearing. I should have said this at the beginning, October the 7th, If we get 5 members, I'd tell votes are on a Thursday night, and then Friday morning flying out to Chicago, or not to Chicago, Quad Cities, Rock Island. We can get Mill Air and be back the same day. So I just wanted to alert everybody to that if your schedule so fits. I know that Mr. West has a very important speaking engagement in Pennsylvania on Thursday the 6th. But yes. But with that, again, I just want to bring it to the members' attention so you heard it firsthand. And with that, I'll turn to Mr. West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also Mr. Ranking Member. I want to look at this from a different perspective because, as you said, I spent 22 years in the military. And so, you know, I remember going out as a battalion commander in 2003 in Iraq, and a lot of things that we did not have and wish we did have. My question is, you know, as we start to look at rapid force initiatives and off-the-shelf type of technologies and innovations, there are a lot of documents that get produced, you know, lessons learned, things of that nature. Do you feel that you have a good relationship with the military as far as getting a lot of those lessons learned documents being tied in with the rapid force initiatives that we have? I know definitely in the Army, maybe in the Marine Corps. And then also, do you have a tie-in with the combatant command so that, you know, I was there at Fort Lauderdale when that happened. Unlike, you know, you get the blast on email, you kind of get to an understanding of, you know, some of the needs and trends that are happening instead of that long procurement system. Maybe we can look at some off-the-shelf type of technologies that can be rapidly developed. Is that type of relationship out there?
I should answer. It's not easy for a small business that has 1 or 2 locations to be at every military base so that we know when people come out, you know, the door and go to the coffee shop that we can talk to them about what their problems are. It's even harder for us to get on a base and talk to a group of operators. And really, the whole issue with SBIR is that we create magnificent technology at the request of the Army. They've put those RFP, or I say Army because
Yeah, I understand.
Soldiers, sailors, Marines. They put the requests in because they need something. And we have technology that can address their need. But they don't know the whole range of technologies that can be applied, and we don't know what's the issue in the field.
The demand versus the supply.
Right. So having a good relationship with a customer, and in the SBIR case that we had from Picatinny Arsenal, we had good relationships at Picatinny. We were in the labs. We were picking up mortars. We were using them for test objects. And then when we went to design the ATAX machine, and we designed it in 90 days. That's essentially off the shelf, even though it's brand new technology, because it takes 90 days to do an NDA at a large company. So the rapid response capabilities of the agile small businesses really should not be overlooked. So when soldiers have a problem, we should know about it and brainstorm about it and try to help. I gave a talk at the Army War College on small business acquisition. I used the same example of the machine. And after my talk, this group of 300 06s typically came up to me and said, I've never heard of a contractor who is good. You know, our feelings about contractors is that they're all bad people who don't give us, you know, water bottles or whatever. They were shocked that here was something that worked the way it's supposed to work. Now, the SBIR that turned into the ATAX was a fluke. It wasn't planned. We had no idea the problem existed in the field. But because we had a little blurb that the SBIR puts on the web, and we don't mind having those abstracts public, they found us, and we got this phone call from a sergeant who said, we have a problem. Can you solve it? And we did. So if there was more of looking at what the small business capabilities are, and for us to be able to understand and bridge, it would be great. But we have no money for the transition. We have R&D, and then somehow it's procured with procurement funds. Big companies have gigantic budgets in their cost structure. I talked about overhead, but they have something called IR&D, Internal Research and Development. So if they make a $3 billion thing, they get a percentage that's audited, audited for the dollar amount that says they can use so much of their cost structure for internal research and development. They can do anything they want with it, including ruggedizing equipment, getting it ready to be purchased. We small businesses have none of that. Historically, it's just a fact, many of those transitions have been handled by congressional interest money because we had customers who were military, who needed something and had no budget for it. When something is new technology, it outpaces the financial structure, the POM, the description of what pays for what. And I'll give you a really poignant example of what happened with the ammunition machine. So we got it done, we wanted to make more, and it turned out that there was no budget for it. But what we were replacing was 100 people sitting in a warehouse doing very expensively the task. But the money was a different color. It was operational maintenance Army money, OMA dollars. And there was no way heaven and earth could move that money to be able to purchase a machine for us that would do it in, you know, whatever percentage of the time and money. Couldn't be done. It took 2 extra years before we were able to get language in the POM cycle where our machine is now recognized. So the small advanced businesses are absolutely in a lurch when we have something new that hasn't been described, there's no funding for it. Now we have no congressional interest funding to help us because it's very transparent. We've done something, competed it, won contracts, built something. We have an Army customer who needs something, who'll answer the phone and say, yes, indeed, this is really, I've seen the prototype, we really need it. And that's gone. That's gone. And so I really fear for all that technology that's been developed and may be on the shelf.
My time is up, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. And just to clear on that, you have a new technology which would have replaced 100 people working, and your technology would have done it by automated it, and you couldn't get the money switched over.
Absolutely not. Not
Okay.
through
Thank you.
the budget rules.
Thank you. With that, Ms. Sutton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And
Your mic.
thank you very much, and thank you to the witnesses. Just point of clarification, Ms. Jacobus, when you talk about congressional interest money, are you talking about earmarks?
I'm talking of, we call them plus-ups.
We call them earmarks.
We call plus-ups earmarks.
It's not new money.
Okay.
It's budgeted someplace for something.
We got to get a new name.
All right.
Get a new name.
I understand. I just want to make sure I'm.
But it's been a critical part of small businesses enabling to put things in the field. I mean, it's just not realistic for us to do all that test and evaluation ourselves.
I understand. I appreciate that. Okay. If we could just go back for a moment to another example I think that you speak of on page 3, because I think it really laid out the case pretty well. If I'm going to just sort of paraphrase here, and you tell me if this is right. When large companies are, it's your testimony reads, the large companies that desire the forward-looking work can apply massive internal research and development funds, IR&D or IRAD, which are for the most part also repurposed federally funds allocated to the prime by overhead allowable funds that come with their large program work like the F-22 and ground combat vehicle. And you also speak of the fact that they have marketing people everywhere and inevitably are connected, right? They're connected. And that and know more about the project than you can ever know from openly published information sources. Even in the case of a small starter contract of several $100,000, the large prime can apply loss leader funds and special knowledge pertaining to the bid, to its bid and proposal funded effort. The result is the smaller businesses won't win, even when they are lower in cost and have a technical edge. And at the end of that page, you say, as I understand it, what is done with the IR&D pool is not required to be delivered as part of the contract. Effectively, the government provides pure investment money without strings to primes. Okay. Would you all agree with that?
We actually have, as a service provider, have an IR&D program. So actually, it is a budgeting issue. You have the bid and proposal money and IR&D are classified in a similar way in our accounting system and in the way you account for costs. And if there's not a huge flurry of proposals that you have to do that particular year, you can take time to do innovation. And I think it scales totally with the amount of money that's coming in. If you're a huge company, you have a larger pool to draw from. It is discretionary. There are rules in the FAR associated with IR&D. It has to be relevant to the mission of the agencies for whom you're working. So it's not without regulation, but it is possible to do some in the course as part of your indirect cost structure in the course of normal business.
And Mr. Kobus, it gives the big guys more opportunity to do flashy presentations. Is that
right? When you say full and open competition, we have sometimes gathered up resources and put together these plain paper proposals, only to be faced with somebody who's made a movie with Hollywood actors in it, showing the product in use. And that's a true example. So you can only imagine. We compete in SBIR with companies 500 or under. So that's a pretty big range, 1 to 500. And we compete very fiercely for this. But the reason SBIR was put into place was that someone 30 years ago smartly and bravely recognized that we would never have a chance to get these big R&D contracts. And the data showed close to 50% of scientists and engineers worked for small businesses. Small businesses, as a total, get 4% of R&D. That means there's a lot of people who are trained scientists, trained university graduates, who are not using their brains to support the problems of the military.
And Ms. Jacobus, somewhere in your testimony, I believe I read something that led me to believe that in some cases, those who are actually winning these contracts are developing technology that actually already exists out there, but they do it this way because then they can own it. Is that correct?
We believe that. I can probably find examples.
Okay. Thank you.
We're going to go to a second round of questions, and I would like to just shorten them to 3 minutes. And if anybody, but we'll keep going as long as anybody wants. First, I just want to know if all of you agree the sense that Mr. Smith brought out there, the trust. There doesn't seem to be, the Department of Defense is looking at you like you guys are going to get us, but we're not going to let you get us. And it seems to me, as being a small business owner myself in the past, my suppliers were my partners. I mean, I needed them to be, and I trusted them until they gave me reason not to trust them. But so all of you agree that you get that sense that in your association, your members are coming in there saying they're looking at us like we're committing a crime before we even been committed. You all agree with that? It's simple. Is that an agreement, Mr. Kobus?
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to sign disclosures that are very
Right.
complicated pieces of paper.
Right.
For example, an unfunded requirement that we have as an SBIR company is that 10 years later, we're supposed to report the commercialization and impact of that
Right.
technology. And that means we have to go to the open literature and see what other public companies who don't, of course, disclose the details, and we have to make a best estimate of what the impact
Right.
of our early innovation was.
Right.
That form says it's criminal penalties to get it wrong.
Right. I've seen this. And Mr. Smith, you're being the mid-sized company. There's some out there that argue that we need to change the sizes and things like that to maybe smaller business or bigger. I mean, these things are based on numbers from probably 20 years ago when they first laid them out. And there's the other alternative is as you go from a small business to a mid-sized business, maybe you reduce the protections, you reduce the set aside so that so small business can grow. Which of those would you think is a better route to go? Either
I
changing.
totally understand your second. I actually would argue that you should relook at the NAICS codes in the relatively Byzantine way that we categorize small businesses. And I know Small Business Administration does that routinely.
Right. That's not this committee's jurisdiction, but I just
right.
want
So
to
I
get your
think
input.
I think somehow set-asides is that are designed to designed from where the government thinks or you think that mid-sized businesses contribute. If mid-sized businesses, we necessarily now are going to compete for larger firms, larger contracts because.
But so your preference would be to look at it and say, let's resize our metrics,
correct.
And
Correct.
it's 600 jobs or $17 million. Okay, all right.
And one of the other interesting things we found with contracting offices, not just Department of Defense but others, is there's a tendency to pick the size standards that's the smallest that the contracting office believes will satisfy. And that has led for me to situations where we can't compete. Again, I come back to a $5 billion procurement set aside for $4 million companies. The numbers don't compute in my mind.
Right. Thank you very much. With that, Mr. Larson.
Thank you. Mr. Hodgkins, a couple of solutions, if you can help us out. You mentioned some of the problems. One is the forfeit of IP in order to do business with DOD. We actually heard something similar from a business in my district who's doing some work for one of the services, writing up the specs so they can go out and compete for the job that the military wants them to do for them. Meanwhile, just basically opening up their books to everybody else who now wants to compete. What's the alternative, or what's the solution to that?
Well, we've advocated a couple of alternatives to the way the government and DOD approaches contracting. We think, as Mr. West noted, that we can be more effective at a two-way communication, knowing the problems in the field, and then having companies, whether they're large or small, understand those problems and identify solutions to those problems. That communication is not as effective as it could be, and as Mr. West probably experienced in the service, when we translate those things into requirements and it gets handed off to a different community, there's frequently a disconnect completely. So we would propose that the government look at more agile activities, certainly in the technology arena, that they look at doing things in a more rapid fashion, in a more agile fashion, in smaller increments. You build capabilities in incremental fashions. For the contracting process itself, we think that there are ways that the government can share, and there are other models that are used. British Columbia has an example as one, where the problem is provided to the community. The community responds, and pretty quickly the government reviews those initial reactions, and they down select the 2 or 3 companies they want to work with that they think actually offer something that they can achieve and they can afford. So there are models out there where you can more rapidly get to the solution. You don't expose, and the lead time issue, of course, is another one where you're left out there trying to support. In the case of a smaller mid-sized business, it may be longer lead time than you have capital for. You're expected to hire people and keep that team in place while the government makes these decisions, but you may have no income from that program yet, and that becomes very difficult. So trying to do things more rapidly, in a more agile fashion, in a more incremental fashion, and the funding issue is also important that I raised, because if we have a 3+ year process of identifying what I want and then getting the money for it, that means that those companies are left hanging, and the combatant commands are not able to deploy the technologies as quickly as they'd like. So there's a combination of a number of things I touched on I think could improve the process.
Great. Thank you. If you could get us some more detail on that question in your response,
certainly,
in writing, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jacobs, you talk about the SBIR getting you a level 4. Can you give us, in your scenario, the hurdles that you had to jump to get to the next level, just so the panel can have an idea of what we have to go through?
Well, one of the reasons that operator. It was a mountain of ammunition that was being backed up with the supply chain clogged as well. So it was an urgent problem, and I think people were willing to work with me. But so we got some swept up money to start the first machine, and we put a mod on an active SBIR at Picatinny Arsenal to do it. But then when the new money came in to build it, we had I'm sorry, Mr. Schilling from Rock Island isn't here, but the people at Rock Island do essentially no R&D, zero. So they didn't even know how SBIR worked. And luckily, with lots of phone calls, I found a gentleman at Picatinny who was able to take over the procurement to put us on contract for that. I think it was a special case because of the urgency, because we were able to put it in the field. We tested it along the way. But the Army had a safety feature in that they had a full-time quality control person, a QASIS it's called, operator with us at the machine. So we actually did have, the doctrine of following the inspector being there. Since then, we've gone through the millions of rounds of testing and done what in the normal process would have been done before we put it in the field. So it really is a great example of how quickly things can be done if people are motivated and they need it. And I'm just really sorry that there must be hundreds of other companies out there that have solutions to problems who really don't have the way to transition them into the field. But for normal things, that lack of TRL level test and evaluation money is a gigantic barrier for small businesses. Gigantic.
Thank you, Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you very much. And with that, Ms. Hanabusa for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe this question is for Mr. Hodgkins. We've heard recently the whole concept about the fact that the DOD is not going to let contract bundling take place. Can you tell me how contract bundling has hurt the small businesses?
Well, contract bundling has been a practice. The intent is to move together and buy, as the government is trying to do in a number of other areas, in bulk, things that are related. What has come out of it, and it's I would identify as one of the conflicts in our socioeconomic policies, is that when you bundle things, as Mr. Smith noted, sometimes the job gets too big for a small business. And so, or they are moved into performing some unnatural role that they didn't start the small business to do. So I think the bundling practice has pluses and minuses. What we have to figure out is a balance on how to do that in a way that we get efficiencies of scale for acquisition for the government, perhaps for commodity items, but find ways for small businesses to compete in those.
Mr. Smith, do you want to add anything on that?
No, I think we live with it as a fact of life, and I actually believe with the budget constraints we're likely to see in the next 10 years, there'll be more of it. And the only thing I would seek your thoughts on is how to allow for some of the procurements to be set aside in ways that are logical for small and mid-sized companies to compete for. There's a lot of value. The personal touch of a small business or the personal touch of a mid-sized business can lead to a building of trust that is, I think, healthy, and the ebb and flow, arm's length relationship between companies and the government. The larger the contracts, the more fiduciary responsibility, the more distrust, the more regulation.
So you actually feel that bundling has a role in the future as we start to cut the budget? You think that that's something that should be kept?
I think it's a fact of life. I don't know if it should be kept. It's efficient from the government's point of view. As the budget's cut, they're going to have fewer people to acquire on the acquisition side. That means fewer contracts, which means more. Each of the individual contracts are bigger. I think it's not preferable. I think more defined contracts, smaller contracts are preferable from the government's interest point of view.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Sutton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, if you could just help to clarify, I know that you point out in your testimony that the lack of clarity regarding inherently governmental functions is a problem. So what do you, could you just expand on what you think those governmental, how that should be defined?
I actually think it's very adequately defined in the FAR today. Prior to the issuing of the policy letter that just came out within the last week or two. I think the definitions, you or I would probably agree that something is or is not inherently governmental. I don't think that is the issue. When you add other layers, things that are closely associated with you, it seems to me that you're no longer putting yourself in a position to look at something from what's the best thing for the government. I mean, if companies are better at doing certain services, why would the government not buy from them? Or if they're less expensive for doing certain services at the same quality, why would the government not want to buy from a company? Companies come and go. Companies do not necessarily have the long-term tail of government employees. So I see it as an advantage to the government to be able to buy something now and stop buying it later. When you build an employee staff, I think you don't have that flexibility. You don't get the change of disciplines you might want. You're interested in biology today, you're going to be interested in electronics tomorrow.
I yield back.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank all of you again for being here today. We appreciate you spending your valuable time, and I know small and medium-sized businesses or wherever you are. I mean, it's confusing to you. I know dealing with the government, I know. But I appreciate you taking the time, and I know how valuable that time is to you, and also to you, Mr. Hodgkins, and your association for letting you come here today and sharing your insights with us. So we appreciate it. For the members of the panel, tentatively October 7th, if your staff hasn't been contacted, it will be contacted, and if you could, in rather quick form, yay or nay, that'll make it easier for us to decide to move forward or not. And with that, also on October the 11th, it's a Tuesday after the 10th, Columbus Day. We're going to have another hearing here with the panel, and your input certainly will talk to the committee staff to get your input on that hearing also. So with that, again, thank everybody for coming today, and this hearing is adjourned.